Chapter 16 of The Life of Benjamin Franklin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Benjamin Franklin by Samuel G. Goodrich. Chapter 16. Franklin reappointed agent of the Court of Great Britain. Visits Germany and France. Returns to Philadelphia. Appointed delegate to Congress. Interview with Lord Howe. Sent as ambassador to France. Asked to be recalled. Chosen president of the Supreme Council of Philadelphia. Death. Character. The disputes between the proprietaries and the Assembly, which had for a long time subsided, again revived. At the election for a new Assembly in 1764, the friends of the proprietaries made great exertions to keep out all those of the opposite party. They obtained a small majority in the city of Philadelphia, and Franklin lost the seat which he had now held for 14 years. On the meeting of the Assembly, it appeared that there was still a majority of Franklin's friends. He was again appointed agent of the provinces at the court of Great Britain. His enemies were sadly vexed at this appointment, and made a solemn protest against it, which they wished to have entered upon the journals. This, however, was refused, and it was consequently published in the newspapers. It drew from him a spirited reply. The opposition to his reappointment seems to have greatly affected his feelings, as it came from men with whom he had been long connected, both in public and private life. In his last publication he took a pathetic leave of Pennsylvania. "I am now," he says, "to take leave, perhaps a last leave of the country I love, and in which I have spent the greatest part of my life. Esto perpetua. I wish every kind of prosperity to my friends, and I forgive my enemies." During his residence in England he consulted with unremitting industry the best interests of his native country. He was everywhere received with respect, on account of his reputation as a writer and philosopher. In 1766 he made a visit to Holland and Germany, and received the greatest marks of attention from men of science. In the following year he travelled into France, where he was received with much kindness and favour. He became acquainted with a number of literary men, and was introduced to the King, Louis XV. Difficulties had now commenced between Great Britain and her provinces in America. Franklin was unwearied in his efforts to bring about a reconciliation. He had frequent interviews with Lord Howe and Lord Chatham and other distinguished English statesmen, who entertained for him the highest respect and esteem. Most of the time during his present residence in England was occupied in these vain efforts. The violent conduct of the parent state drove the colonies to war, and Franklin returned to America in the year 1775. The day after his return he was elected by the legislature of Pennsylvania a delegate to Congress. Not long after his election a committee was appointed, consisting of Mr. Lynch, Mr. Harrison, and himself, to visit the camp at Cambridge. They here united their efforts with those of the commander-in-chief to convince the soldiers of the necessity of remaining in the field and persevering in the cause of their country. When Lord Howe came to America in 1776, with powers to effect an accommodation with the colonists, a correspondence on the subject took place between him and Dr. Franklin. John Adams, Edward Rutledge, and Dr. Franklin were afterwards appointed to wait upon Lord Howe and learn the extent of his powers. These were found to be confined to the liberty of granting pardons on submission. The Americans at that time would not thank the king for 1,000 pardons, and the interview terminated without effecting anything towards a reconciliation. Dr. Franklin was an earnest advocate for the entire separation of the colonies from Great Britain, and his writings upon the subject had great influence on the public mind. In 1776 he was president of a convention which assembled for the purpose of establishing a new form of government for the state of Pennsylvania. In the later part of this year he was appointed to assist Mr. Silas Deane in managing the affairs of the colonies at the court of France. No one could have rendered more service to the United States in this situation than Dr. Franklin. His character was much honoured in France, and as a philosopher he was held in very high esteem. He was received with respect by all the celebrated literary men of the day, and this respect naturally extended itself to all classes. His political negotiations were of the greatest importance to his native country. When the independence of the United States was acknowledged by Great Britain, Franklin became desirous of returning home. The infirmities of age and disease had fallen upon him, and the situation of his country rendered his services no longer indispensably necessary. He applied to Congress to be recalled, and Mr. Jefferson was appointed to succeed him in 1785. In September of the same year Franklin arrived in Philadelphia. He was shortly after chosen a member of the Supreme Council for the city, and was soon elected president of the same body. For the next 3 years Franklin still devoted himself to public business and to his political and philosophical studies. He retained his desire of being useful to the last of his life. In 1788 his increasing infirmities compelled him to retire from public office. His complaints continued, and he suffered very severely from his sickness. He still, however, remained good-natured and cheerful, was perfectly resigned to his situation, acknowledging the justice and kindness of that Being who had seen fit that he should be thus afflicted. On the 17th of April, 1790, about 11 o'clock at night, Dr. Franklin quietly expired. He had reached an honoured and happy old age. From small beginnings, by a uniform course of prudence and honesty, he had raised himself to high station, wealth, and distinction. In considering the character of Franklin, we perceive that the most marked trait was his habit of economy. By economy we do not mean merely care in gaining and keeping of his money. We mean care of time, of labour, frugality, industry, system, method in all his business. To this we may add economy of his health, avoiding all excess and unnecessary exposure. His cheerfulness and good nature were also remarkable. He was ever happy and entertaining. His anecdotes and jests were always to the point, and his manner of conversing and writing was at once pleasing and effective. For his public services his country owes him her respect and gratitude, while his philosophical discoveries have excited the admiration of the world. His name will live with the names of the few great men who have conferred enduring benefits on mankind. The following epitaph on himself was written by him many years previous to himself: "The body of Benjamin Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding. Here lies food for the worms, yet the work itself shall not be lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more beautiful edition, correct and amended by the author." End of chapter 16.